obviously I'm naked from the waist down, but if you
That's
could just kind of cut me there.
It's the way you shoot the news, my friend. Yeah, that's the way you do it. Good.
Where are you, Ron? Are you out in the sticks, like, as you look? Are you
Looks like it, doesn't it? I'm in my cabin.
You're in
or
your
something?
cabin, your lumberjack cabin.
I'm not in the mountains. I'm in my apartment.
Oh, okay. This is that a back? Is that a fake?
Yeah, that's just see that?
Oh, it's look at you.
Everybody thinks it's real.
Well, it's because you got the double flannel going.
Yeah.
And then it's like the wilderness man. Impression management. I get it.
Feel like we are entering into. I'm gonna coin the term. This is gonna be the neuro decade, and I teach a class in neuro leadership, and we see neuro marketing and neuro business and neuro parenting, and on and on. And so that's gonna
bullshit.
be. Well, I knew you were gonna say that, which is fun, but I think. And I think you would agree with this, even if you don't maybe agree with it, with the way they're using it. To be our best selves, I think this is going to be. I mean, we're entering in a time when we're going to see a lot more of this focus on how does the brain work and how can we use it, to be our best selves. Whether it's as an endurance athlete or in a corporate setting, or a 37-year-old mom staying at home with the kids. So I think all around, I'm bullish on this is going to be, maybe this is going to be the new decade of the brain.
Yeah.
And I certainly want to maybe circle back to Andrew Huberman. I mean, you look at this guy being a rock star on Instagram. What the hell's going on here? And by the way, why aren't you the rock star? He's got nothing on you.
He's a handsome guy.
Yeah, he's a handsome. So are you.
No, listen, he is a remarkably accomplished neuroscientist. And one of his biggest skills is he's a great science disseminator. He can turn fairly complicated topics into everyday language that we understand. And that takes a skill. I tell you, that is hard to do well, because some of my academic or research heroes are terrible at it, but it's wading through impenetrable science to get to that. And then you see someone who it seems to come so effortlessly to him. And he's, I think he's great. I think he's good.
Yeah,
but I agree. I agree in terms of what you're saying. The next decade. Okay.
So that's kind of what I'm thinking. But also, I know you and Leslie are starting to say, okay, we train athletes, we train endurance athletes, but how can we bring this into a corporate setting? And as we know, there's a lot of parallel there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think the general theme I want to see with this will be useful and valuable for endurance athletes on some level, but also for that 37-year-old, stay-at-home mom.
Absolutely.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Day in the Forge. I'm excited because I get to talk to somebody where I don't have to, I don't have to be formal.
Right. Are you ever?
Well, sometimes you have guests where you're like, okay, just make sure you don't say anything, wrong. This guest is not quite in that category, and you'll understand why as we get moving here. Today's guest is Simon Marshall, married to Leslie Patterson, who was our guest on podcast number 2. If you haven't listened to that podcast, please check it out because it was a lot of fun. So he is founder and coach of Braveheart Coaching. He's co-author of the book The Brave Athlete. And he also is co-host of the Xterra podcast. So all those co's that you hear are with his lovely wife, Leslie. Simon has a great background. He's got a bachelor's degree in sports science, a master's degree in kinesiology, and then a PhD in sport and exercise psychology. So he's got quite a little collection of degrees there. And I got to be honest, when I met Simon for the first time in person, I was being coached by Leslie. And we were in Cozumel at their Sufferfest training camp, and we immediately hit it off. And I felt like when I met Simon, it was like, okay, I've met one of the Jedi masters of sports psychology.
Oh, how disillusioned you were.
Yeah.
How naive you were, Ron.
And unbeknownst to him, I said, okay, I'm going to be his Padawan. And so I was like a sponge as we did the camp, soaking up as much as I could from Simon. And we've we've kept in touch over the years, and I would say he probably doesn't realize that I've learned a few things from him as we've gone along. So this is I'm excited about this, and you'll get to know Simon is pretty casual and off the cuff, and he'll pretty much say what's on his mind. So this is going to be a fun podcast to kind of dig into.
And I promise I won't swear. I know
that. Hey, we got through a whole podcast with your wife, and I don't think she said one curse word. So
she was
on. I think I'll challenge that one.
Yeah, did she let one slip? I don't remember
that one. Yeah. I think that's where podcast number 2 is where we lost our G rating.
Yeah, but yeah. So let me open it up with this, Simon. I often like to give, as you know, I'm a professor at the University of Colorado, and I touch on a lot of these neuroscience topics. And one of the first things I like to tell my students is, you are all lazy. And I do this for a couple reasons. Number one, it's kind of my sadistic sense of humor to watch the look on their face, like, I can't believe you just called me lazy, which some of them are, you can almost tell they're offended. And then secondly, I want to illustrate the point, and I think maybe, Simon, you can elaborate on this, that in essence, we are all lazy. Would you agree with that? And you kind of see what I'm getting at here?
Well, it's a loaded question, to be honest, Ron. Let's face it.
All right. Unpack it for us.
Unpack it. Yeah, I think lazy in the sense that we like to take shortcuts. So you could reframe that as efficient. I think that the human brain is wired to be, very efficient. In other words, because of there's a huge metabolic burden, of course, of having a busy brain. It's very glucose hungry, particularly our frontal cortex. And it isn't just metabolically we're trying to literally save energy, but I just think many of the processes, the mental process we go through to reach conclusions would take too darn long to be really effective or useful for us in our everyday world. So the brain loves shortcuts. And when they work for us, we call them healthy habits, right? And when they work against us, we call them sort of bad habits or just annoying habits or any other the habits that you can sort of point at your spouse or your partner at for getting frustrated at. So that our brains are wired to do that all the time. And to try and fight against doing that is sort of to fight against biology. I think what the key is to figure out where those shortcuts are sending us astray and making us make bad decisions, and when we can also rely on them a bit more and not overthink.
Which kind of, this podcast, one of the things that we talk about and we kind of use as a tagline or a mantra is do hard things. And so with all of what you just said, how do we do hard things? And is that, I think you would say that's useful, at least in certain, situations, to do hard things. I mean, a lot of your athletes do a lot of hard things. I know that from firsthand experience. So is it a matter of just deciding when is it beneficial to do this hard thing and when is it beneficial to take the shortcut?
Yeah, I think that, so one principle that underlies not just sort of the way our brains changes in like neuroplasticity, right? This notion of our brains are neurally changing in response to being in new environments, but it works in fitness as well. And it's the overload principle, right? So that in order for something to improve, to grow, it might be a metaphorical growth here, it has to be stressed and recover. And that phenomenon is really also a little a sort of clues to how we get the brain to change as well. And so it comes as no surprise that if you want to be better at coping with the hard stuff, the suck, the difficult times, you have to make sure that you are forcing yourself, if it's not involuntarily imposed on you already, to deal with and encounter hard stuff. That's really just as you wouldn't be expected to be prepared for an Ironman by only ever running 5K and riding 15 miles. You just wouldn't be prepared. We have to stress the brain and the body to do that. So the principle, and obviously the tons of now psychological research and neuroscience research is really shoring this philosophy up. It isn't just the sort of the clip round your ear talk you give to your kids, like this would be good for you, it's character building. We know it's actually good science now. And we've probably, this is a side conversation, we've probably for the last sort of, at least the last few generations of children, starting with parents in the 60s and 70s, raised a whole generations of children to shy them and keep them hidden from stress or discomfort. And I think ultimately we're doing them a gross disservice by doing that.
Wow, we could go right into parenting right now at the beginning of the podcast. He's rubbing his hands together. He's excited. I want to pick apart the concept of being lazy, and you're talking about neuroplasticity and kind of changing our behaviors with doing hard things. So, Ron's a big time runner. If he's running and he's pushing himself and doing 100-mile races, or some of our guests have hiked some of the 7 summits, and that is pushing away from being physically lazy and you're doing hard things. Does that also transfer over into, say, a week later when either one of them want to go do a big TED talk?
It does, yeah, I think so, Tara. You're right there. I mean, we don't know that there simply aren't the studies that have looked at whether ultra running translates directly into coping with sort of fairly acute stressful environments like big talks or what have you. But the biological pathways of how this stuff happens supports that conclusion. And obviously, one of the first myths that I spend my professional life dispelling is that the mind and body are separate entities, when really the mind and body are part and parcel of the same thing. The mind is body, and in fact, there's a great researcher called Sam Macora at University of Bologna, who studies resilience and the neuroscience of stress and coping, particularly among athletes. And he often talks about how the mind, or thoughts in particular, are just emergent properties of brain physiology. So our bodies and the state that our bodies are in has a big role to play in the thoughts and feelings that we get. And then obviously the stressful environments that we're in physically, and obviously having to cope with those mentally at the same time. We are getting structural changes in how we think about challenge, what we think about our self-efficacy, our ability to persist under very specific circumstances, resilience, and so on. And so these things, whether it happens, probably doesn't happen from, Saturday to Tuesday, but we do know that if you've ever, and anecdotally, people who can relate to this, if you've ever done something that at the outset, you thought, there's no way I can do this, or I'm really sort of doubtful I'm going to pull this off. And for some 1 in 5, 1 in 10 chance that you do actually pull it off, you seem to sort of draw a new line in the sand of what you think that you can do. And that alone can be really powerful, because that's about self-confidence and self-efficacy, and the showing up on the start line. It takes a lot of self-confidence and a lot of self-efficacy, and then once you're in, you can get that dopamine snowball rolling, and you kind of build through hard things. So yeah, I think they're part and parcel of the same thing. So like, if you want to be better or be more sort of better used or adaptive to dealing with chronic stress, or acute or chronic stress, putting yourself under physical duress is also a good technique for doing so.
And this is a fun one. What if, I've learned so many lessons from my endurance career, whether it was Ironman or ultra running. And, inside, I think to myself, I would love everybody to learn the lessons I've learned in those very physically demanding things. And I know some of the clients I have, they have no desire to do what I've done. And so what's your answer to that? Can we learn how to develop that part of our brain without physically, stressing it? I feel like the physical environment is as close as we're going to get to a survival situation, and it really imprints the brain in a way that I have not been able to replicate, outside of that. What would be your thoughts on that, Simon?
Well, this is getting meta now, Ron, because this you're asking for, is there a kind of a quicker shortcut to things? And we started talking about a lazy brain, right? And you've exactly proved my point. You want a short silver bullet.
There you go. The hack.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are things that we can do. And some of the neuro research that's coming out, particularly around certain structures in our brain that regulate discomfort or effort-related cues that also process emotional distress. And one of those that I know that you're really interested in, as am I, is the anterior cingulate cortex. And I think that when you think of some of these structures, and really the metaphor that we often give with athletes is akin to a bank account, right? That I'm writing a check to run a 50K, or in my case, a 5K or a 50-mile bike ride. And that account that I'm writing that from is the same account that processes emotional distress and emotional discomfort. So if I've had an argument with Leslie, or got a parking ticket, or we've got any worry basically that I might have, it's coming from the same metaphorical bank account as the effort bank account to push hard in physical evidence, because emotional and physical discomfort and pain in brain world are indistinguishable. They're processed by the same structures, and some of the neural pathways are the same, and so on. And so the reason I say that is because it gives us clues about how we might get better at one without doing the other. So, for example, some of the newer studies have come out. They've not been yet completely conclusive. That's not a question, I think, of the science per se. It might just be the small studies, the nature of them, and how we've conducted them, and so on. But if I can cognitively fatigue you, for example, if I can do things, give you a task that really tire you out mentally, and one of those is called the Stroop test in psychology. There's a bunch of others, but think of them like, you're staring at a screen and you're pointing or putting a pointer when you see a click on a screen. Is mind-numbing work, boring as heck. And then I ask you to go out and do an FTP test, or a test to exhaustion, or some big physical task. Lo and behold, your performance suffers because of it, because you've been cognitively pre-fatigued, even though I'm just fatiguing your eyes and your frontal cortex versus your muscle, your legs and your lungs and your arms and all the other things. So there is this relationship between the two. And there's some other data, albeit fairly still thin on the ground, that folks who are excellent at coping with physical discomfort have a tendency to have to cope with more emotional discomfort in their life. So, for example, one study found that the incidence of childhood trauma in elite cyclists was 2 to 3 times higher than it was in elite, but still professional, but not at the top, 1 or 2% in that world. So these people had anterior cingulate cortexes that looked actually different, even though that they had done the same training volume, the same. And what was it about those athletes? And the theory is that, and we don't wish this on anybody, of course, to have endured, physical or emotional abuse throughout your childhood. But one of the consequences of that, the neuroplasticity of the brain, an effort to cope and adapt in response to being in these really harsh environments, is probably an ability to tolerate physical discomfort better than the guy or the girl next to you. And so again, this isn't, what do we do with this information? We're not going to say, okay, if you want your kids to get an athletic scholarship, you start beating them early. But it does mean that we do the role of adverse experience in childhood, and even if you're not a kid, as an adult, the role of adverse experience to make you all around sort of hardier physically and mentally is a pretty good lesson to live by.
And now I'm so curious to ask you, how do you fit that into what we're going through right now? Because I think it was on a podcast with Rich DeVinny, and I know we talked about it with a former guest on this podcast, the concept of adaptability. And not everybody is super adaptable, but after a year, and it'll end up being longer, of course, after a year of the entire planet going through a pandemic, let alone the other 17 traumas that everybody's suffering right now, we're all going to become a lot more adaptable, or so everyone thinks. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. And obviously, when we often talk about, particularly in the science of coping and what coping is, and, how did you cope? You've done so well to cope. I can't believe how well you cope. And a lot of people will answer that if you speak to athletes or speak to people who've been in extreme trauma, how they got out of situations that many of us would have thought, oh my God, I just rolled over and that would have been it for me. And they say, well, I got no option but to cope, right? That's all that there is to do. So when you start to expose yourself to stress, chronic stress repeatedly, and I'm not talking about chronic stress in the sense psychologically chronic stress, but stressors that are lasting now a year, and it will last longer, that there is some beneficial outcome to that doesn't in any way outweigh the negative stuff that's happened. So this is not to be confused with saying we'll be better for going through Corona. We won't. But what I am saying is that there is a perspective here to say that we'll come out of this with new understandings or new levels of tolerance or new levels of inquisitiveness or passion or stick-to-itness with things that we have missed or that we took for granted. And that as a concept of, which is really what the scientists talk about, a deficit model of happiness. And the deficit model of happiness is simply that happiness, like as a psychological, psycho-emotional construct, one of the things that is the biggest predictor of who feels it and when is the fact that you haven't had it or you've been without it, right? So the deficit model, if you want, this is why the study of whether it's lottery winners or people who have many resources at their disposal, they lose the ability to get pleasure out of things, right? It's called hedonic adaptation. The brain is wired to build up a tolerance to pleasure. And if everything is at your disposal anytime because you have the material or financial resources or what have you, your brain eventually adapts to that. So you end up feeling sort of as though nothing really does it for me. If you might know people like this, or if you've got friends who have never wanted for anything, it might be harder to hold their attention, or they seem quite fickle and they dabble a lot, but they never actually stick to anything for very long, or they always seem to be somewhat discontent. But you take someone who hasn't had much, or they've had some career ending, some profound traumatic moment in their life that may be irreversible. Their levels of happiness often not just go back to the pre-trauma, but exceed it than they had before, because there's nothing like having something taken away or the threat of being taken away to make you feel as though that you appreciate it more. And so that, again, I think that also is converging on this conclusion that adversity is good. It isn't the suck that makes it good. Of course, no one is going to pretend. Some people are going to say, "Oh, I love the pain," but if you're honest, like, it sucks. Like, if you've, as Ron knows all too well,
I thought Leslie loved it.
She
does.
I was
just going to call her out, but I thought no.
even Leslie during the, and I'm not talking about the coffee rides or when you're the intense, but those moments where you're all in, all out, and it's hurting. Yes, you can mitigate that hurt to a certain extent by using some strategies, but it isn't really that. The benefit of doing that comes afterwards, not the during of it, right? There's no one likes to feel as though that they're in pain and you're getting some big psychic understanding of the world during the discomfort. It's afterwards that we tend to have those responses. And in fact, on our podcast, I came across, we had an adventurer called Paula Reed, and she's an adventure psychologist, a fascinating gal in the UK. And she studies the psychology of like adventurers, people who really do, like, skiing to the South Pole, going to climbing Everest, people who do kind of serious expeditions, adventurers. And she found that this was a fairly critical piece when she did some of her qualitative interview work with these people, going knowingly into the unknown. And so that going into a risky situation, that you've got the skills to be able to adapt on the fly, but you don't know what you're getting. And that would terrify most people. And in the adventuring community, there's something called a fun scale. I don't know if we've mentioned this when we've chatted before, Ron, but adventure scale is quite a fun. So a type 1 adventure or type 1 fun is when it's fun during the event and it's fun afterwards to look back on, right? So going to Disneyland is type 1 fun. It's great during it, and then we look back on all the great times we had. Type 1 fun. Type 2 fun is when it's pretty miserable during it, but you look back on it fondly. And this is where most competitive sport fits in, right? There are not many people smiling a mile 20 of an Ironman run, but afterwards and signing up for races, the cycle gets, so the ability with our hindsight to look back on those experiences as beneficial. Type 2 fun seems to be really profound. And then type 3 fun is when it's miserable during it and it's miserable to look back on it. So these are the sorts of examples where we're really hoping to avoid at all costs, even though Paula Reed would argue that you need a few type 3 examples in your life experiences to appreciate the type 2s, and at least to know, well, at least I'm never going to do that again, because I never want to feel like that again. I never want to blah, blah, blah. So I like that idea of this special sort of zone of discomfort during for benefits after is a good principle to think about how this can build physical and mental resilience.
If you're going to go to a training camp with Leslie and Simon, it's type 3 fun.
Type 3 fun. Yeah.
I'm kidding. I don't want to scare people off. It's hard, but I would say it's type 2 fun. But so Simon, I've been pretty honest with our listeners on this program that part of my kind of transformation was I became soft, lazy, sitting on the couch, not doing anything really hard. And I was just quite honestly avoiding it at all costs. And so for that person, I mean, you just talked about this idea that getting out there and embracing that adversity can make you stronger. What would you say to that? I mean, if I am a listener and I'm saying, hey, I want to get tougher. I've been sitting on the couch for a long time, and now I want to embrace that adversity. Any advice on that?
Yeah, I would say, and this is coming from someone who wrote a book about how to help people do this. You can't learn it from a book. I'm undermining my own darn book sales, right? But the essence here is that you have to earn the ability to suffer and tolerate discomfort. You can't learn it. You have to earn it. And so whilst the textbooks and the articles, we can learn some strategies to practice, but that doesn't actually substitute for putting yourself in environments where you are, all you want to do in psych terms is you have thoughts of escape, right? Oh my God, I'm never doing this again. Who talked me into this? This is the last time you're swearing at them under your breath as you're only 2 miles in. So those experiences are, and this is one of the tactics that we have athletes practice, is that you look for moments of suck, moments where all you want to do is climb off, soft pedal, go home, moan, bitch, whatever it is. And you see them as opportunities to say, this is, and we have a little standing joke in our world about, we talk about the anterior cingulate cortex, but because it's shaped a little bit like a sausage. So we talk about sausage training, which is probably a whole different website. But suffice to say, sausage training is when you have athletes visualize the part of their brain getting thicker and denser and bigger and stronger during those moments where you're thinking, oh my God, this is awful, this is terrible, I'd never want this to go on, and so on. And Leslie's actually a really good example of this at the World Championships in Hawaii, the Xterra World Championship. So it's an Olympic distance triathlon, but all off-road. So you're mountain biking and trail running. So it takes like twice as long as a road triathlon. The conditions about 3 years ago were dreadful. They were muddy and the surf was huge and everyone was moaning and complaining. And I get that, you wake up, you want the perfect day and you're having to push your bike for 2 miles. It's not what you think of in a bike race. You're actually walking with it because the mud's too thick. And what Leslie was doing, and she prepared for this adversity, she knew that races are won in under conditions. Who copes with adversity the best? That is the sort of the gate for determining, usually in big events, who's gonna thrive and perish. And so Leslie has over the years been able to pray and hope for bad conditions, because everyone feels good with a tailwind, with a downhill, right? Everyone feels good. So you need inclement, I'm just using environmental conditions as one example of this. You need bad conditions for the mentally resilient athlete to shine, right? Because everyone is feeling good when everyone feels good, or when the conditions are good, everyone's feeling good. So she was looking at these opportunities as, even though these are terrible, and I'm also pushing my bike, but she knew that most of her competition is going to be sort of mentally throwing the towel in, and they go into sort of, I just need to survive this, versus we often refer to it as, you shift from a competitor mindset to a participant mindset, meaning I'm no longer pushing out to win, I just need to get through this. Or in sort of age group everyday language, this is, I realize, because they don't want to get stressed out of the fact that they get too nervous in head-to-head competitions or pinning on a number. The goal was just to enjoy it, and and all perfectly fine reasons to participate. But that shift in mindset is often the way that we self-sabotage our efforts, because we've always gone out when things don't go as well as we want. I was just doing it, it was just a training day and just enjoying it. But Leslie had recognized early on that the way to win the big events, so not just your average local events, the big world championship, the athletes who cope with adversity, and don't just cope with it, they relish them and look forward to those moments coming. This is a chance for me to separate myself from the rest. And that's why she ended up winning by 10 minutes on the worst conditions that they've had probably at the race ever. And Leslie was able to do that because that's the way that she trains herself. She knows that adversity, she'd earned the right to do it.
So
Gosh.
talk to us about this book a little bit, The Brave Athlete, because, when I'm reading the title of it, Calm the Fuck Down and Rise to the Occasion, how did you guys come up with that? And I know you talk about the three different types of brains, so to speak, and I'd love for you to go into that. But how much of it is practice, practice, practice to change the neuroplasticity of how you're handling things and embracing the suck versus changing your narrative when you want to see those things change?
Yeah, well, I actually don't distinguish necessarily between changing or playing a new track for what you want to think and hopefully to impact how you feel and act, versus just kind of general shifts in my mental preparation or training for something. I think that one of the things that we were one of the sort of the scientific underpinnings of our book that you'll never actually see, but it's under the surface, is this notion in psychology. We've moved away in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, moving away from a control model, and I'll explain what that means in a minute, to a coping model. And the control model is, if I feel X, get rid of X. X doesn't help you. You need Y. So don't think about X, no X, no X, only Y, only Y. This is the cliched of looking in the mirror. I'm strong. I know I can, right? And so this control, and this is the whack-a-mole approach, right? When you're trying to exorcise negativity, I've got to be positive, and any negative thinking that comes in, bash it on the head and replace it with a positive thought. Or, oh my God, I'm nervous. That means I haven't mastered this ability to be like them, and they just seem to always relish the competition. And so that's the control model. And in fact, there's lots of psychotherapy and psychological tools that are built on that. But the shift now, partly because of neuroscience research, is to a coping model. And a coping model is you learn to jump hand in hand with all of your gremlins or demons or whatever you want to call them, right? Everyone is anxious, and the ability for the resilient and it isn't so that they don't have these things. It's just that they are able to run alongside them, to swim alongside them, to jump anyway. And that approach really underpins what we now, how we operationalize being brave. It's the ability to not have fear. It's to jump hand in hand with your fear. And this shift in not just in the sort of performance psychology world, but in clinical psychology and psychotherapy. For example, there's a relatively new therapeutic model called acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. And the whole principle, and it has really good efficacy data about how it helps a whole bunch of different mental health issues. One of the pivotal pieces of it is the acceptance part, is that, and I give the analogy often with athletes, is that imagine you're standing on a hill and you're looking down at a battle raging beneath you between two sort of medieval Braveheart type armies. And one of those armies, they're all armies in your own head, but one of those sides is the side, the you that you want to be, you wished you were, you hope to be. And the other side is the pathetic side you really are, or you feel like, right? And so you think that in order to be happy, that side has to beat that side. And I can't go on and do these other things, have the relationship I want, the career I want, until I've sort of sorted my own shit out, right? Until that battle has been won. And you could spend your life investing lots of money and time into bigger shields and sharper swords and better tactics. But you know what? That battle is futile. It's probably unwinnable. And I say that largely not just because the scientific literature and the biology of trying to have mastery and control over every thought and feeling you have is probably biologically impossible, but in practical terms, I've never met anybody who's able to do it, ever. Like everybody I know, even the highest performers, are still plagued with an element of doubt or anxiety or things that they're worried about or concerned, and they do it anyway. And so instead of looking and standing and trying to from that grassy bank and looking down, trying to win that battle, the skills that we actually need to be teaching are turning away from the battle skills. So can you have the confidence and skill to have the battle raging behind you, and just for a day, just for an hour, focus on in the opposite direction? It's still there. It'll still be there when you get back. Trust me, the battle is still going on without you. But for a moment, can I turn away from that and focus on the things that are going to hopefully build the happy life, content, confident life I want? And so that shift from staring at, trying to win, versus turning away from and saying, I know you're there, but I'm just I've got this, don't worry. That is quite a paradigm shift in psychology, and it's a shift for athletes as well. And that's really the hallmark of what this Brave Athlete book is about. And I've learned that not the hard way. I learned that by experience, not by training or academic training, because when I was in the field of elites, well, I've still worked with elite and professional athletes, but working as a team psychologist for a elite Tour de France level cycling team. And you see that these people who you've seen on television are earning millions of dollars and they are the best of the game. And then you talk to them in private, you see that they've got all this, dealing with all the same shit as everybody else, right? They're just going faster while they're doing it, right? And that was a little bit of a revelation for me. And I say that if I could wave my magic wand for athletes to say, what one thing could you do to help people understand about how to get a better grasp of this? I would have, as you walk down, I use an example of a start line in sport. You walk to the start line, there's hundreds or maybe thousands of people all looking nervous like you. You could see little thought bubbles like percolate up above their head, and you could read what they were actually thinking. And you know what you would see? You would be you'd probably be horrified and scared initially, but you would be comforted because you would think, they do too? Oh my God, it's not just me. And that alone is extremely powerful and comforting, that everybody is coping with some level of like gremlin or something on some level. It's just that some people are just very good at hiding it. You never think they have because they're so much faster and more accomplished than you, but everyone is dealing with the same stuff. And it gives me some sort of comfort, because I know that we're, at the end of the day, we're all born with the same equipment, the same ingredients, and what the soup we make out of it, right? And how we choose to cook it does have an impact on how we cope with it. But we've all got the same kit. So it's no surprise that everyone is largely dealing with the same universe of stuff.
I don't know about Tara, but I feel better already.
I was just going to say, I feel a lot more comfortable too there, Simon.
when I've gone on, I've actually done a blog post on this where I've talked about this idea of battling my inner demons. And I've also said, you don't extinguish them all. And to hear you say that, I'm like, there it is. I as I like to say, that was my field research, but not to say it's not useful. I think that some of them I do extinguish and some of them I just quiet them down, but they're still there. And I know they're always going to be there. And I know Tara and I have talked about this a lot. So many of our clients, when we're coaching, I just had one yesterday of a young leader that said, I don't feel like I belong here. Or I don't feel like I deserve to be leading anybody. And I said, hey, everybody feels that way. And so I'm so glad to hear you say that even elite athletes that we think are, on this pedestal and they can do no wrong and they've got everything locked down, and they don't. So I think that's a great message for everybody.
Not only do they haven't mastered this because it's a futile attempt to try and master it, and I would also say, not only should we be not encouraging people to sort of like whack-a-mole them, we should actually be talking about them. And we should be, and one of the other cornerstones in psychology is that trusted relationships are built on vulnerability and weaknesses, not on strength. So we bond as humans on weaknesses and vulnerabilities. We don't bond on strengths. We just get agitated and ego threatened by strengths, right? So when you start to, and this is great for coaches, we do this in our coaching world, but you can do this if you're a psychologist or anybody, and there's some sort of knowledge hierarchy in a relationship. Self-disclose your struggles, your own struggles with it. And many of us don't want to do that because they're not going to hire me if they think I can't even get to grips with this. So that's our own chimp brain ego defense mechanism, right? Feeling as if we're going to be judged because we can't get a handle on it. But actually, when you do that, you find something quite remarkable happens. People open up to you. They feel better. It's not just me. And it gives you a wonderful opportunity. And it's obviously empathy at its heart, but it gives you a wonderful entry point for figuring out and discussing how you can, or letting them admit that this is an issue for them, but particularly for the athlete that comes, or the coaching client that comes to you like, arms crossed, what could you tell me? I've been told I need to be here. There's nothing I can learn here, right? So by doing that and opening up, it can have quite profound impacts. And of course, the leadership world and organizational psych world has known this for some time. This is what like team retreats essentially do, or where you go away on these often, on the face of it, ludicrous or weird challenges, and you get down and dirty together. And because you're seeing people at their most vulnerable, right? Hungry and tired and smelly and bad hair and awful clothes and whatever it is for in that environment, and you end up being stronger because of it. You bond because of it. And I mean, you've only got to look through the training for special forces, that the training is about those experiences. If you want to truly have a group where you will do, the sense of team becomes more important than the self, and why that's important in certain events. You need to put yourself in environments where you're all down and like on, struggling. And that's how you build that mettle. You don't do it through everyone is showing up, in their fast gear, or on the, when they feel super great or fit. So yeah, I think it's a good lesson for us all to learn.
How do we bring that, what you're talking about with special forces, and I can relate to that a little bit. And then Ron, I'm sure you can relate from your sports, your days in baseball. You can create those teams, right? Like you're saying, getting dirty, doing hard things, seeing people at their most vulnerable. How do you and Leslie, when you're working with corporations and teams through your Braveheart coaching experiences, how do you bring that into the office? And now I'm so curious, what is your challenge when there's not really an office?
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
everybody's trying to create this, via Zoom.
I know most of our work is now, well, it's probably always been done virtually anyway, right? Like this, we're over Zoom or through a video and audio link. So you can do that. I mean, it's not ideal because I always prefer in person, for there's lots of reasons why that is too. So I think that it's self-disclosure is one thing. And one of the things I've learned, certainly in psychology, is if you lead with all of the things that you've struggled with, and you don't claim to have all the answers, but I often think of it a bit like a facilitator, that, listen, I don't know the answers either, but the answers are locked somewhere inside of you. And there are some techniques and strategies to help people solve their own problems, but you're just kind of a facilitator of that, and methods for that. So I think that's one really key piece. But I think one thing is getting people to open up and tell us the true problem, the reality of the things that they're actually struggling with. And it's so hard to get people to do that, particularly if you've got any ology in your title, because they are like, oh, here we go, I'm going to be told this, or you're going to psychoanalyze me, or you're going to test me. And so if you can start to believe that, and my own personal sporting career is littered with humiliation, embarrassment, and inadequacy. I mean, I mean, I've had some successes as well, but I've had all those experiences, and I talk about them with our athletes quite a lot. And Leslie has the same. They have more resonance coming from Leslie because she's also achieved the top where I haven't. But I think it's quite comforting to know about other people's struggles when you're trying to get a handle on your own, if nothing else, just to normalize them, right?
Right.
This is probably a battle that you're going to be fighting your entire life. You're never short of a full frontal lobotomy or 10 milligrams of psilocybin every 2 weeks. There's probably nothing that you can do to truly exorcise, to get rid of that stuff. We just have to become better at saying, oh, you again, I was waiting when you'd show up. Anyway, we're doing this anyway. That's the mindset we're trying to get into, whether it's changing people's relationship with failure, trying to get people to tolerate like just simply discomfort, pain, tough situations. That's the mindset that we try and nurture.
And I will say that Simon walks the walk. I still remember from training camp when you talked about the story of actually letting the air out of your tire.
I know.
Before a tough race.
I'm embarrassed to even, it wasn't even before a race, it was during a race. That's how humiliating it was. And so I just upgraded to a category 1 amateur cyclist, which is the top amateur level. And the gap was from 2 to a 1 was pretty pronounced. And it was a criterium, a short circuit race, and I'd been dropped off the main group, and I was trying to claw my way back. Of course, no real chance of that because a group goes faster than an individual, right? And I thought, this is my debut with my new category. This is utterly humiliating. and I had also gone a bit anaerobic too quick, and I pulled over and I let my own tires down. And I rode around to the pit with a flat tire. And of course, then, and it wasn't one of these races where you could put in a wheel and wait a lap and stuff. It was like, see, oh man, yeah, I know it was tough. And I never admitted it to anybody until about 5 years. And this was 40 years. I mean, this is a long time ago, not 40 years. It was a long time ago. And I only admitted it. And I found that it was like, oh my God, other people have had either versions of a story like that, or they've thought about it.
Oh, they thought about it, yeah.
They prayed for a flat tire, right? They prayed to something to end their misery. I actually just went one step further and actually did it.
Yeah. I sometimes in the middle of a long run, we're out running in the mountains in an ultra marathon, and some people have asked me if I'm afraid of a bear. And I've been in the middle of ultra races where I'm like, I hope a bear comes up and eats me. just make it stop. That'd be my way to kind of pull the plug.
Well, I'd probably stop short of wishing death on myself.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot of discomfort. Let's go back to a word you touched on earlier. I know that you've done a Facebook Live with your coaching athletes, and I thought it was fascinating when I listened to it. And I also listened to Andrew Huberman talk about this thing called agitation. And I thought it was fascinating why we feel agitation. What is agitation? And also, I think a lot of people right now during this pandemic are agitated every day. And so what's going on there, Simon? Why are we agitated? What is that? And is that good for us?
Yeah, well, in a sense, it is good for us because the principle that we spoke about earlier of overload, of stress and strain is the way that we improve and get better with rest, right? So if you've just got continuous stress and strain, we know where that leads to in chronic stress and so on. But if you have these undulating cycles of stress and strain physically and mentally and emotionally, followed by periods of rest or recuperation or recovery or avoidance or getting away from that, or it resolves itself, we are able to cope with it better the next time. So that's the principle of that about agitation is it is good for us. It's not some like inconvenience that we would not wish on ourselves. We need to have some level of agitation, but it stems from our nervous system, right? And this is now, again, to borrow on some of the neuroscience research is that, and psychologists are sort of latching onto some of these ideas quite frenetically because they've been and help us understand so much that psychologists have struggled to explain for so many years, is that our brain and our nervous system, our spinal cord and our brain really are the sort of the fountain of our entire experience, right? Whether it's from not just the obvious things like what we sense and perceive, but also how we think and feel and how we act. And so our brain, our nervous system, and if you think about that as the sort of an overarching sort of neural pathways in our body, is that if you want to fundamentally change the way that you think and feel, a starting point is to change your nervous system, your reactivity of your nervous system. And so, yes, there are lots of, and this is probably comes back to Tara's point earlier on about changing the narrative versus changing my body. And there are two different strategies that might work. One is a much more of a find and replace with thinking versus if I calm myself down with breath work or meditation or something, am I more likely to be relaxed and calm and be able to persist and endure and so on. And so the starting point is agitation is really reflects our nervous system. And we often, with athletes especially, I don't talk about the autonomic nervous system and parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. I talk about gas and brake pedals. So our nervous system essentially has our autonomic nervous system, the part that really is responsible for most of our automatic processes. It has a gas and a brake pedal. And our gas pedal, which is the fight or flight response, if you're really gunning it to the floor, it's really what we consider to be agitation or an alertness pedal, right? It's any time that the brain and the body needs to focus, to pay attention. It might be studying, it might be running away from something, it might be getting ready for something that's big or important. A whole bunch of things happen, physiological reactions happen in our body to make us prepared to cope with it. And they are all driven primarily by the sympathetic or nervous system or your gas pedal, your alertness pedal, your agitation pedal. So cortisol goes up, noradrenaline goes up, adrenaline goes up, all of these other hormones and neurotransmitters that increase heart rate, blood pressure, pupil dilation, all these factors and our focus of attention narrows so that we can lose the periphery and we can zero in on something. We have this portrait view of the world. They're all symptoms of being in an alert state. Now, when that alertness gets too high for the task, or it starts to affect our health, we don't like it, we might feel a bit more like agitated or at least stressed, or that's what we think of the fight, or panic at one extreme. But it's a continuum of like being just slightly feathering the gas pedal to foot to the floor for days on end. And so what we want to try and do is have mechanisms to both know when it's appropriate to push the gas pedal down. I need a gas pedal now, right? I need my gas pedal. An example of this in very practical terms is feeling, your alarm's gone off, you've pressed snooze once, and you're like, oh my God, I can't face getting up. I don't want to. It's dark. It's cold. I just want to stay in bed. My parasympathetic, my calming, my brake pedal, everything is relaxed and calm. And I know I need to just summon something out of somewhere to get myself out into the world. And so you can do this by increasing the level of alertness or agitation in your body, by doing things physically that put the gas pedal down. So breath work is a good example of this. So you can raise not just your heart rate and your blood pressure quite quickly, but you can make yourself feel more ready for some, get up and go-ness by doing rapid inhalation breaths, right? This is like Wim Hof breathing. You could do cold water immersion is another way to quickly put that gas pedal to the floor. Now, you're not going to get out of bed straight into a cold shower, although some people do, but you can do 10 or 20 very short, sharp, inhale, focused breaths, and then get out of bed. It will feel easier to get out of bed by doing that. And conversely, when we need to, say, put the foot on our parasympathetic nervous system, our brake pedal, so now we need to have noradrenaline and cortisol drop. We need serotonin and dopamine to go up. We need all the rest and digest system. So there, we can also focus on things like our breath, or what we focus on with our eyes. We know that the connections with our breath and nerves that connect our diaphragm to parts of neurons in our brainstem, as well as parts of our neural retina, that layer, epithelial layer at the back of our eyes that connect directly, our brain tissue that connect to threat detection centers. By focusing our eyes and having a certain sort of pattern of gaze or a certain breath inhalation and exhalation cycle, we can put a gas pedal on, or a brake pedal on, so we can calm ourselves down in the moment. So although those two things are simply nervous system sort of hacks or adaptations, or things that we can do that are directly targeting neural biological responses that make us feel better, thinking and feeling better. And that we haven't even touched the thinking, feeling stuff strategies yet. That's just the nervous system stuff. So we often start with athletes with techniques that are very action oriented versus thinky feely, Enya drumming and techniques, because many people who have action-oriented lifestyles, they don't like sitting down and closing their eyes and imagining, Zen. So you can often start, and you get quick wins this way as well. Like, for example, when we teach this physiologic sigh breath, that you could have an impact on how you feel within 15 to 20 seconds. I can make you feel calmer in about 15 to 20 seconds. And knowing that you can do that is not just important for someone who is about to go into a world championships, or someone who is about to give a presentation to 300 people, but it's about someone who's just about to do anything that is scaring the bejesus out of them, right? I'm not very, I need to lead a team, but I'm kind of introverted. I don't like leading a team. I don't like confrontation. I've got to speak to my team. I've got to give someone criticism. I've got to give her a performance review, and I'm not looking forward to it. I'm going on a first date and I need to be the best version of myself. If I don't love, anytime you're about to cross some threshold of, I need to be the best version of me now, and I've only got a minute before it happens, those are the techniques that you prioritize. They work very quickly versus the 4 years of yoga tantric practice that hopefully might work when you're 109. No, I'm being facetious there, of course.
Yeah. And it's such a great illustration of the mind-body connection, and everything you just said there. I mean, there's so many things that we can do with our body, in a physiological sense, that will impact the way we think and feel. And so I'm glad that you illustrated that. And so if I were to sum that up, Simon, so agitation, it's a stressor. arousal, maybe?
It's not a stressor, it's a stress response. So it's
stress response.
It's a reflection of our sympathetic nervous system, the alert agitation part of our nervous system that's revving all our physiologic systems up to be focused, to be reactive if we need to be, physically reactive, to run, to hide, to fight, or to concentrate, right? And so we need that process. If you didn't have a sympathetic gas pedal alert system, agitation system, you'd just be like the stoner kid, right? Or whatever, you'd just be, you'd never do anything.
Yeah.
You'd never get anything done, right? You wouldn't be able to, sit down and have stare at a laptop for a few hours and get a project done, because the systems that are helping you stay focused and on track, the biology behind that is not going to be working. So we need that. We need to have, it's just that unfortunately at the moment, most of us are caught with our gas pedals are down most of the time. So that's when we're ruminating and worrying, and in this perpetual cycle, it might be anxiety and depression and so on.
I think that the key point there, right, is we got to let off the gas pedal every now and then. I think a lot of people in this pandemic right now have been on the gas pedal for who knows how long. And that's bad, right?
It is. And one of the things that we've learned again, so if you think of adrenaline and noradrenaline, these sort of rev up neurotransmitters, that one of the antagonists to these, the things that not stops them working, but sort of retards them working or attenuates their effect, is dopamine, right? So, and dopamine is secreted when obviously we do things that we like. It's associated with pleasure, but it's also, more importantly, dopamine is about desire and moving towards a goal. But the great example of how dopamine has an antagonistic effect on our sympathetic noradrenaline response is breaking, cracking a joke when things are tense, right? So when we're nervous and anxious, if you crack a joke, it's a dopamine response, and it's having a biological effect on your stress reactivity. And so this is one reason, in fact, why both Leslie and I, we try and have a fair amount of humor in stressful environments. We talk about them in sort of silly terms, or we swear, or they're all fairly engineered to kind of microdose dopamine during sort of adrenaline focused activities. And in fact, now some of the even newer research I'm talking about in the last year or two has found that there's a quit reflex in the brain. I don't know if you've come across some of this research, Ron, yourself. There's a quit reflex. We've only looked at this is the royal we, of course. It's not me personally, the scientific community. They've found that when levels of noradrenaline in the brain, noradrenaline is secreted in the brain as well, not just in obviously adrenal glands, but in the brain. When noradrenaline levels get so high in a certain area of our brain, we don't have to worry what that part is for the now. It sends a signal to the motor cortex to sort of like shut down and stop, right? So in other words, when noradrenaline reaches a level that's so high, it initiates a quit reflex. And in mice, we know this is they freeze, or they stop dead, or they just, they might run, hide in the opposite direction, they go in the other direction, but ultimately they'll stop. Humans often know this, not as sort of we literally freeze, but we just like, and then I just couldn't be bothered anymore. I just didn't want to do it anymore. I just stopped. Well, do you remember what was going through your head? No, I just had this overwhelming desire to just quit, right? That's what it feels like. And so when we have athletes who talk about, I've got a quitting problem, we try and differentiate between the shit quits and the legit quits, as we say, like when you actually should be quitting because you're actually hurting yourself, or versus you just need to push through it, you're being a bit of a wimp, come on. So the techniques that we use to help overcome that are all microdosing dopamine as an antagonist to noradrenaline that's causing the quit reflex. So how do I microdose myself with dopamine under high conditions of stress? Well, one is if you have a chance as a crew member, if you're working with someone who's in the stress and you interact with them occasionally, you see them being serious, and be them like, if you can break that with some level of levity or joke, that is going to help. Not taking yourself too seriously is really important. Having rewards, segmenting that strategy of having something at frequent intervals to look forward to in the context of I'm out here for 9 hours or 10 hours, but every 30 minutes, I've got this little thing that I can't wait to do. That's microdosing yourself with dopamine, which is actually not just, we're just sort of trying to help it feel good. It's actually brain chemistry to keep these levels of noradrenaline down. So that it works. And it's the same. I mean, in some ways, you know, when we look at people who choke in team sports and, you know, the slapping around the face, snap out of it, like cliche, is actually for good reason. Now we know that obviously focusing on when you choke or you're distracted or you're in your own head, we need to get people out of their own head. So some sensory experience, a slap around the face, forces me to be, what are you doing? What are you doing? Or look into my eyes. I want you to follow my breathing now. People who've had panic attacks, you're trying to help them come down. Breathe in time with me. Keep looking at me. We're doing that to get them out of their own head. And then you start to give them things to look forward to, or say, see, we've already done this, right? You've done great. You've already done 2 minutes of this and you feel better. So you're trying to get that shift, and that is changing brain chemistry, which is changing the ability to ultimately persist and get back out there.
Oh, this is like mine and Ron's bag of endless potato chips right now. I don't want to even end this podcast. Simon, being a professor of mental toughness, we got to ask you our signature question, which is mental toughness, resilience, and grit. For the average everyday person, how do we implement it? If we are not the athletes that you're used to working with, or the CEOs of corporations, how do we incorporate these three things into our daily lives, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously most of us, in fact, I would say, do experience it and we just might not call it that, right? So any chance that, for example, one of the things that stresses or at least depletes, we call it ego depletion, this anterior cingulate cortex, is making decisions, right? So there's one thing, the more decisions you have to make is more checks that you're writing from the account that's going to help you put up with the hour run that you're about to do, right? So the one thing is that most of us, our daily lives are peppered with things that test our willpower, mettle, whatever. Some of them are on fairly small levels and so on. But what I would say and the reason I say that is because the human condition needs agitation and stress to be able to improve. So it's a function of our sort of hardwired, you know, Mother Nature has given us. And if you don't have it, our brains will seek it out for you, right? You'll look for opportunities to do this. Why this is one of the theories behind why kids seek out play opportunities that have quite a high level of risk. This is the climbing trees and or doing this stuff where the mums and dads are like, oh my God, what are you doing? Get down. And kids are learning some of these lessons along the way, and they're serving an evolutionary purpose so that they are more able to cope with that down the line. But for everyday people, I would say start to have a fundamental change in the way that you look about adverse or circumstances that suck, right? So rather than thinking, I've just got to get through it, this isn't good for me, this is hurtful, this is painful, look at them as opportunities, the type 2 fun. They're not going to be nice now, but trust me, you'll thank me for this. This is the sort of the approach. So when you start to say, okay, what sort of opportunities can I have? What are the things that I'm kind of is out of my comfort zone? And for some people, it might be simply just showing up to a group for something, right? Because I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want them to see that I'm not very good. It could be sport. It could be a hobby. We're not really doing that much, obviously, now in COVID. But what that outside the comfort zone looks like for you, and we can usually get at that quite clearly just by talking to people and asking them to explain things that they feel comfortable at and not, and where their anxiety levels are, and then trying to so think of them like 1 to 10 scales. My 10s are, you know, dinner karaoke, dinner theater, participatory, this is me, dinner participatory theater where I might be called on and then have to finish the night with karaoke, right? That is my
That's
worst.
my night.
The fear.
That's my worst fear, like those two things together. And so that might be my 10. And so, but I'm going to have things that are my 9s, my 8s, my 7s, my 6s, and my life is about 4s, right? I love my 4s, but I need to, this is the systematic desensitization model, is that the way that you get better at things, you gradually up the stakes each time. So I need to know what my 5s are. My 5s might simply be, you know, joining a group where I'm a beginner, right? And oh my God, I've been usually in my life, have some expertise. I'm never usually a beginner in something, and that's oh my God. So and one of the things I've done is I've started to learn the piano, and I'm terrible, and I've growth mindset. I can be better. I'm not good at this yet. All the things that we tell ourselves, but so that's my 5s. My 6s might be then to do a little recital for Leslie and some friends, or or my family. Oh, listen to this song I play. I'm going to play for you. All right, that's a 6 versus just taking a lesson online, which is a 5. And I'm just using my piano as a silly example, but I would have something for each of these: my 5s, my 6, my 7, right up to 10s, and I'd like to see people saying, okay, know that your 5s, and people who have chronic anxiety might love to live in 2s, but they're really not. To just go one or more, have experiences that are 1 or 2 numbers above where you're usually comfortable, and get used to doing that on a more routine basis. And for some people, it might be if you're standing in line waiting for something, spark up a conversation with the person in front of you. Oh my God, I could never do that. They're going to be like, well, why are you speaking to me? That might put, if you're introvert, that might put you out of your comfort zone. But doing something like that might be your version of the 50K run, right, out in the woods to do it. So it's finding things that just put you out of your, I now know I'm firmly in the 5 now. I know this is definitely a 6 now, and that is different for everybody. So trying to figure out what that is for you, and then making sure that you do it. I need to have 5 6s in my week. I'm going to try one every day where I'm out of my comfort zone in some shape or form. And those sorts of little lessons can be really helpful. So it's a long-winded answer there. Sorry, Tom.
Oh my goodness, though. That was I never heard that, and I love that, because people always ask me, what does that mean? Should we, I hate the saying, do something that scares you every day. I go, that's, is that realistic?
Running out into traffic
365
without looking, that'll scare you.
So I'm looking for more practical ways to tell people to get out of their comfort zone, and that's a great one.
So the strategy, the formal strategy, is called a fear ladder, or it's called a stimulus ladder. This is how we treat phobias, right? So you take the essence of the thing that you are most scared of. Mine, if you can't read between the lines, you don't have to be an amateur psychologist to figure out my chimp demons. If participated dinner theater and karaoke represent the pinnacle of it's about social judgment and rejection and being sort of ridiculed in front of others, right? So that's my little chimp. Oh my God, I'm so terrified of that. And so what I would be doing then, I've had my little ladder of 1 to 10, and I'm not talking about necessarily specific examples like dinner theater or karaoke, but the potential to be shown up in front of other people on a big scale, and everyone can see, and everyone around you is doing the thing that you're trying to do better than you are. You concoct this set of circumstances, but then you start to fill in what you're writing things in. My 9, this would make it an 8. Well, what would make it a 6 and not a 7? Well, the presence of that. And you force yourself to have a ladder of 10 things. And then you've got a framework for saying, okay, what do I need to, what are my goals this year for my mental and emotional health and resilience? I need to do more of, I'm not going to get into 8s or 9s yet. They are somewhere in the distant future when I have, some level of Jedi status to be able to do this. But I'm going to do 5s and 6 to start with. I'm going to have enough of them, and you can quantify that, right? How many times have you done that?
I've started, and by the way, we're
sorry,
done.
Ron, I gotta interrupt because I got a workshop I gotta go teach in 2 minutes. So
all right, and I got actually got to teach a class.
What a pleasure! Like I literally have 2 pages of notes and books and research.
That's
I need
good.
To
I'm glad it was
so that's
helpful.
really great. Super appreciate it. But I have to hop off. So
no problem.
Good to see you, Ron.
And you too.
And nice to meet you, Simon.
All right, see ya. Yeah, Simon, I won't keep you long. I was just thinking. So the other thing I've started doing, or I'm going to start doing this as I train for trying to take another shot at Leadville, of doing what I'm going to call mental toughness training days. And so I think I heard you say that you're starting to experiment with your athletes, or maybe you've been doing this for a while. And so I'm kind of, I'm not so much that I'm looking for free coaching, but how often should I be doing that? Should I do that every 3 weeks and say, okay, as I build, in my cycle of training, should every 3 weeks, should I say, all right, this is going to be one of those just, ass kickers, and maybe to simulate. I started thinking about, could I simulate what you guys do in camp? Could I say, okay, every 3 weeks, I'm going to do a 3-day succession of kicking my ass? And is that too much? Not enough? What are your thoughts on that? How often should that happen?
There aren't any, there's really no sort of good research to go on about how frequent adverse experiences need to be. I think they have to be somewhat regular, and I'll talk about how we operationalize that in a moment, just simply by knowing these principles of, incremental overload, recovery, rest, and then start. So if you're only ever doing one thing, one day a year where, oh my God, that was dreadful, I mean, it's going to have an important benefit, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as having something every month or every 2 or 3 weeks or so on. Of course, if they're every week or too frequently, they're exhausting and they're not pleasant to be in, because by definition, it's type 2, right? So what we do is we generally have athletes have a session which is designated as a mental toughness session. Usually once every 2 weeks. It might be, and that's only because, or every 3 weeks. And most of our athletes are on this meso cycle. We call it this 1, 2, 3 week build, fourth week. And then 1, 2, 3. Some athletes is 1 week and 2 weeks, and so it does vary. But around that sort of the culmination of your last big week before recovery, we have an experience in there which is pretty tough to cope with. Or you have it on the first week back after recovery, so you've kind of replenished your sort of your willpower, as it were. You're more able to cope with it. So that frequently. So it's usually at least once a month and sometimes twice. And then what we do, the sort of the general principle we use is we ask an athlete to rate out of 10 the likelihood of they could do this session as written, right? And if they say, and most athletes, most sessions are 10 out of 10. They might not be pleasant or it's going to be ugly, but I know I can do it. I've done it before. So mental toughness sessions, and we borrowed this from some of the goal setting research on, that interface between just the right amount of challengingness, but scariness, but still comfort. I'm still going to try. It seems to be about a 7 to 8 out of 10 likelihood of you being able to pull this off. So if someone says, I'm 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 certain I can do this, there's a 20% chance I may not be able to. That seems to be a good sweet spot for mental toughness. And of course, you don't actually even have to ask that after a while, because historically we have training data from people, right? We know what they can handle, and they've often written notes about, you say, I really struggled on hour 3, or we know where those areas are. So if I set someone a 4-hour bike ride and I know that they've been really struggling to even get into hour 3, they're going to look at a 4-hour bike ride and think, oh my, who do they think I am? I'm not a professional athlete. I can't do this. That's exactly the response that we want, because once you are able to crack it, that line in the sand gets withdrawn, and you start to compare the next threatening. But remember, you did it up on that time. Yeah, I've done that. Or I've ridden that in our world in Southern California here, the mountain that you've ridden up, I think, Ron, called Palomar Mountain.
Yeah.
Big climb. And
that beast.
Oh my God, I could, how many on the Palomar index, how hard is this ride? We've done Palomar. You can do anything, so that I think Mount Evans or whatever, there's whatever you have a big thing that you can benchmark it to is probably helpful.
The other thing I was thinking, and I'm going to use all this, I was wondering, you kind of answered my question before I asked it, of how do you evaluate that? And it sounds like you ask your athletes and scale of 1 to 10, but I'm also thinking, I'm fascinated by the idea of perceived effort, and can we move that dial? And, I was fascinated by Leslie, her last world championship. And I said, hey, Leslie, how'd it go? She goes, I got to the finish line. And I said, wow, is that it? And I go, only somebody that trains like Leslie could do a world championship race. And they go, is that it? Isn't there more? And so that, to me, that's perceived effort. She's dialing. I mean, she's messing with that dial of, what she can do compared to what I can do, totally different. But who knows? Maybe if I push myself, I could turn that dial like she does. And so, that's kind of fascinating to me. So where I'm going with this is I'm going to start what I call a mental toughness training log, where I can go back at the end of my training at 8, 9 months. I can go, okay, look at all these times that, I went out there and I did something really hard, and that will give me hopefully that confidence, and to again, change that dial on perceived effort to, in the middle of the race, I can say, hey, I've done worse than this. I mean, is there any truth to all that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so that on the one hand, knowing that you've done something in the past. So one of the things that I think terrifies most athletes is going into an event for a distance or a time that they've never actually done before in practice, right, or in training. there's nothing scarier than that, right? Then I've never run a marathon. The first I've run is 15 miles, and now I'm expected to run how many, you know? Or you've never done an Ironman. You've never been out on the swim, bike, run for 12 hours, but on your feet for 12 hours before, and now you're having to do it. That's pretty scary, and there's a whole host of psychological reasons why that's scary. But there is a little exception to this, is when you've come close enough, it gives you enough confidence to be able to do the thing, right? So this is why marathon training, rarely do they have people run, 26 miles in training. Sometimes they do, but they say running 21, have some 21-mile days, 22-mile. If you can do 21, 22, 23, you can do a full marathon. So there is an element of how much of a hard thing do you have to have done to think, no, I think I can do that. Now, what that depends on, how much of that thing is your sort of baseline levels of confidence and self-efficacy. So people who are either super anxious, trait anxious, or they have low confidence or so on, that has to be much higher. So if I know an athlete has low confidence, I'm going to want them to have done the thing that they're about to do already. And they might have done it over and over again. But someone who has a more confidence or a bit more, a stronger sense of self-efficacy about them, they can probably get away with doing it. But I've done 90% of it. I know what's in store. I can have a go at it. But yeah, I think that if you can start on a start line and say, there's nothing that I'm going to face today that I haven't already faced or worse, that's a huge confidence builder for athletes. And that's certainly how Leslie has coped or dealt with her professional life.
Love it. I actually gotta teach a class in about 9 minutes, Simon. So
okay.
I'm gonna refresh myself here and then go talk to some students.
All right, buddy. Well, listen, good to chat as always, and hope it goes well.
Yep, and we'll be in touch when we get this produced and out on the airwaves. So
sweet.
We'll let you know. Thank you for your time.
Right,
thanks for giving back. See you.
Bye.